Coffee and Stories. It's the space where English-speaking culture lovers, literature lovers who live in Romania, be they expats, repatriates, Romanian professionals, and Romanian diaspora, can find some time to enjoy a conversation with special people. And today I have two really special women. Tara Skurtu, an American poet and professor who lives in Romania, and Mirona Bengescu, an attorney, author, mother, wife, who are here today to share their life experiences and how their road, their path, took them to Romania, to Japan, to America, to many other places around the world, but they're currently here sharing some of their energy with all of us. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, I have their two books with me, and I love the fact that you're both authors because it's a feeling of accomplishment you both had in your life. And this is Tara's book of poetry. It's called The Amoeba Game. And this is Scrisori di Cipangu. And for people who don't know what it is, can I say what it is? Cipangu was the very first name given to Japan. So before people called it Japan, it was called
old name given by Europeans.
Cipangu, where Mirona is a co-author. Yeah. So welcome, ladies, to Coffee and Stories. And we're going to start with you, Tara.
Okay.
And I'm curious, of course. A beautiful, smart American poet is currently living in Romania. And have you written any poetry since you are here?
Well, I've been here about going on 3.5 years, so yes. Although I'm a slow writer, so I average 1 to 5 poems a year. But yes, since I've been visiting and since I've lived here, I have written a number of poems. In The Amoeba Game, the last section in the book takes place in Romania.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So what got you here?
Yeah, this is the question I get every day because people are very confused by me, especially cab drivers. Why are you here? I came here in 2013 with a poetry fellowship from Boston University. I was supposed to choose a place I'd never been, where I didn't speak the language, preferably didn't really know anyone, and it had to be a place that would inspire me to write. And I had actually never traveled abroad alone before. And I thought, okay, they didn't want you to pick straight up vacation spots like Paris. And I thought, okay, well, I have this weird last name that nobody I have found in the US has. And it's a misspelling of a Romanian name because my great-grandparents came from the Transylvania region at the beginning of the 1900s. We don't know anything about their history. Just we have this strange name. And I thought, I'll apply to go to Romania. And so I was there for like 2.5 months. And it ended up being this really magical trip where I landed, the city I picked to stay in, there was an international poetry festival that week, the week I arrived. And I got invited to it. And then I got adopted by the literary community. And then I started traveling all around Romania and giving readings. And this made me want to come back. So I came back with a U.S. Fulbright Fellowship. I taught poetry at a university in Brașov. And I'm a workaholic. So they gave me another Fulbright Fellowship. And now I'm here.
We're going to come back to your story, which is totally fascinating. And we're going to go to you and your story of living in Japan. You were there for 1.5 years? A year?
Roughly.
When did that happen?
2008.
Okay. And between that time of you going there for school, you were learning there. So tell me, what were you studying? And which program did you attend in Japan? Where in Japan were you located? And how did you end up writing a part of that book?
I'm a law graduate here in Bucharest. And after I graduated, all my colleagues were, I don't know, going to Europe, France to study. Some of them already starting work. I didn't want to do any of those things. I wanted to go far and somewhere, like Tara said, similar, somewhere where I didn't know anybody, I didn't know the culture. It was very different from Romania. So my thoughts were I should go to the States Japan, completely different
Cultures.
places and cultures. The States, I couldn't find any scholarship to go to the States, and I found a really good scholarship to go to Japan. The Japanese government is supporting people, Romanian students who want to go there. I was the only Romanian student, law graduate, applying to the scholarship. Everybody already knew Japanese. They were Japanese language scholars or people who wanted to study Japanese culture. That was the environment. And then I got the scholarship, surprisingly. So I went to Japan. I chose Kobe City. I had to pick from three places, three cities. I had Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe. Tokyo was obviously a great choice, but I thought it was very, very expensive for my scholarship, and I couldn't do that much if I were to live in Tokyo. And I really, really liked the program in Kobe. My program in Kobe was an English study, was environment law, which it was not developed at all in Romania at that time. So I said, perfect. I don't know that much about it. I will go and study there. So I picked the one in Kobe City. And my professor in Kobe City, you get assigned a teacher in Japan, a teacher who takes care of you, guides you, which was a very strange concept for me. And this teacher was exceptionally proficient in English. He was a national negotiator for environment treaties all over the world, so he had lots of international experience, and he kind of adopted me. So I went to his program in Kobe and lived there for 1 year.
Okay, that sounds really great. And when you came back, you started writing the book.
When I came back, I started writing a blog. It's called Japonia de parte aproape.
Japonia de parte aproape.ro?
No, it's .blogspot.com.
Japonia de parte aproape, just Google it.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear about her
Just
experiences
find
in Japan, yeah.
Yeah, I started writing, as a novel thing. People were not going to Japan at that point.
That often.
Yeah, not students anyway. They were going for marriage or other personal, objectives. And me also, when I announced to my family, guys, I'm going to Japan, everybody said, but why? Did you met somebody? No, I'm going there to study. People just didn't go to Japan at that point. And I started writing a blog, and then I started meeting other Romanians who were going to Japan to study or to work or for various reasons. And somehow an online community was created, and the idea of a book appeared. Some of us wanted to write a memoir type of book. Others just wanted to write like a fictional type of book, make it more interesting and more diverse. So we went to the fictional one, and we wrote our stories and then compiled it in a book, and then we were very surprised that we got published. Yeah,
that's great.
That's the story of a book.
Okay, and the book is called?
The book is called
Scrisori din Cipangu. And we can find it online if we want to buy it? Okay.
I think you can still find it online, yeah.
And you have 4, 8, 12, 14 authors.
Yeah.
So 14 people who share their stories about living in Japan.
Yeah, they are very diverse stories. Each of us has a very different perspective. Some of us have lived there for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, or just passing by. Or it's an interesting read.
When I repatriated from the United States, I started thinking about the necessity of taking yourself out of a familiar environment to be able to jump, to take a leap, or to basically jump to the next level, because new environments give you different perspectives. And I'm curious to find out how you would compare the literary environment in the United States to the literary environment here in Romania, as a lifestyle? Because you're a poet. You're a
Funny
poet.
question for me.
As a lifestyle, how does the lifestyle of a poet professor look like in the United States compared to Romania? Aside from the alcohol.
That was a joke because a lot of Romanian poets drink a lot of alcohol, which is a little different than the Boston scene, which tends to be
What do they drink in Boston?
Water? No. They're more fun than that. But so
They
this
write
is
sober poetry.
Sober
you know,
poetry.
even alcoholics, a lot of them write when they're sober. Okay. Not a lot of people write when they're trashed. So this is a really complicated question and a really hard question to answer, because if you think of, like, you know, I have a map of the U.S. this big, and the Boston scene is like this tiny little speck, but it's historically, Massachusetts has such a rich literary history, especially with poetry.
Then I will rephrase. So compare the Boston literary scene to Bucharest.
Okay.
The two B's.
Okay. So the Boston literary scene, the way I actually got into the poetry scene was through spoken word. And I am not a spoken word poet. I'm very much a page poet. But I found that the spoken word scene really let you in and supported you, gave you a microphone, gave you an environment, gave you community. So that was the beginning of my poetry life in Boston. I would say that it's compared to here, it's much more academic. It exists more within the academic realm. And a lot of people are like, you know, you're a poet, when they find out. Well, what do you do? Like,
Yeah.
money.
How do you make a living? That's right.
And a lot of poets I know, well, I always say we're collectors of jobs. We work a lot of different jobs. And a lot of times it's teaching. And many times it's teaching at more than one university, because in the U.S., a lot of people are adjuncts, which you have a contract per class, and it doesn't pay you a lot, so you need to get a number of them, either at the same school or at different schools. I have friends that teach up to 7 classes, which here, I guess, is normal, where professors teach 7 classes per semester, which is crazy to me to have that as normal. So there, poets are doing a number of things, working in the food service industry, having many different types of, we just work a lot. Here, it's the Bucharest poetry scene is very interesting. It's like, I find it to be like a boys' club.
Very interesting.
And it's a lot of partying and a lot of, the readings I find to be much more laid back. You kind of never know what's going to happen at a reading in Bucharest, whereas like in Boston, I've been through a lot, and I say through, a lot of very monotone poetry readings, which is why I like to engage the audience, because I've been bored so many times, not just in Boston. And there are great readings in Boston. But so they're very different. I find like, if I were to compare them, I would say like Boston, a bit more like the grown, I don't know, like studious, a little bit more studious. Here, it's kind of a little bit more wild. This is a hard question.
Is it more like more unpredictable?
Everything is unpredictable here in Romania.
Okay.
Maybe they just like we get more, you know, just the inspiration comes from angst.
Yeah.
I
But
think we have that kind of culture that you need to be very conflicted or suffer to be inspired.
well, this is one of the main things I've noticed about the poetry here, is that most of the poetry I read here, especially by young authors, it's very dramatic. It's very I'm very depressed. Not all of it, but it's not as narrative. So what I'm used to in Boston and in the U.S. in general is much more of a narrative style, more of a storytelling style. Not always, but so the poetry is very different.
You know, that's an interesting point of view, because I have a Facebook page, a little platform of poetry, which I recently started, and going through Romanian poetry, selecting poems. I read one poem every day. Selecting poems from Romanian authors, I found, and I think I knew it, you know, but I didn't consciously think about it until now, a lot of pessimistic poetry. I mean, it's either about suffering or death,
A lot
or
of it is about suffering.
so I'm thinking, is it inherently us Romanians who feel that, that we have to express it? And you're right, the younger the poet, the younger the writer, the deeper the negative emotions. It's like you're
This is universal.
instead of growing into pessimism, you start from there, and then maybe you balance yourself out. By the time you're, I don't know, 30 or 40, let's say you start writing before you're 20. I'm curious about the Japanese culture towards literature and maybe the feminine presence in culture in Japan. Did you encounter a lot of women who were not necessarily poets, but they had any role in the Japanese culture?
Oh, short answer, no.
Okay.
um, I was an outsider, and I enjoyed being an outsider, to be honest. Because as an outsider, you somehow are tolerated, and people are maybe a little bit more honest and not so conflictual towards you. But as an outsider and as an European, I found the role of women quite restricted. I had women teachers at my university, but if we had a gathering or if we had the places where speeches were to be held, there were always the men holding the speeches, and always the women had a very respectful attitude. Well, respect is embedded in the culture, in the Japanese culture, but even more so, they were deferring to the male
Man.
teacher. I had a very remarkable teacher. She was a Japanese language teacher, and she was not a formal university teacher or anything like that. She was actually teaching us after being at home with her kids for at least 18 years. So after her kids
Grew.
grew, she was kind of allowed to get a job as a hobby, as her husband put it. And she was telling us that she really really enjoys having a job after being at home for so long, and she was really passionate and putting all of her soul into teaching us Japanese. I mean, I felt very connected to her, and she was very authentic in her experience sharing with us. And she was not complaining or just stating the way things are in Japan. I don't know if they still are because 10 years have passed, so maybe more modern attitudes have formed. But then it was how I'm relating.
I'm curious if either of you ever felt um, in your formative years that being a woman limits you in relation to the career paths you can take. Because from my perspective, growing up in Romania, I never ever had this feeling. So Romania being culturally or traditionally what it is, and even though some of the industries are still dominated by men, growing up, in the 80s, 90s, I never ever had the feeling that there's something I won't be able to do. And maybe that's something specific to Romania, and I think it's laudable that we grew up in that field. But how about you growing up in the US?
I mean, I cannot speak for everyone, but for myself, maybe I'm lucky, but that has not been an issue for me. I tried not to be a poet for like the first half of my adult life. And
What did you try to do?
I wanted to go to medical school, and so I was studying English and Spanish and doing pre-med at the same time. And then when I started doing all of this, I thought, oh, I can write poetry on the side. And so I had no idea what I was doing. I took a workshop at some point, and I just started writing and editing, and then I looked up, okay, how do you get poems in magazines? Look at the submission guidelines. Okay, and this was back when you had to mail things. Now you just submit just about everything online. And I would get my envelopes and my cover letter, didn't know what I was doing, put my poems in order and walk to the post office. And I did this over and over and over again until I started getting published. So I don't think that it took me longer because I was a woman. Um, I didn't have that experience, but I think I might be lucky to have the opposite experience.
Do you feel any difference here in Romania? Do you feel any kind of downside to being a woman living here in Romania?
I have a different experience like you did in Japan, where I'm a bit of an outsider. So I feel like there are some people aren't necessarily the same with me. Uh, but yes, I see it all the time. Like I've never actually been introduced to as a poet at readings by my blonde hair, my sexy legs until I came to Romania.
Oh
And
my
I
God, that
remember
is so true. Yeah.
at one poetry festival, this is how I got introduced. And the cultural attaché of the U.S. was sitting next to me, and she goes, "Does this usually happen to you?" And I said, "Here." So things like that. You know, or like I was telling you earlier yesterday, I asked for a wine recommendation at a restaurant, and I got recommended a Sauvignon Blanc because, surprisingly, it's a girl's wine. So I experience a lot of interesting, strange gender things, and I find that I'm always confusing people because I wasn't raised in a place where men stepped back to let you go through the door, and if they did, it was kind of awkward. But here it's so programmed, so I'm always stepping back, and men are always kind of standing there, and then I step back again, and men are just waiting. So I play this really awkward dance with these traditional gender roles that I have no idea how to deal with.
Do you like them? Do they make you feel uncomfortable?
Um, Sometimes when they're really smooth, I don't mind them. I have to say, but I do find that in some areas men get more respect than women here.
Okay. Well, what about life in Japan? How did you feel there? You know, how were you treated there by men versus women?
Mostly okay because I'm a foreigner. So, no.
Did you get a glimpse of how they really are, even though you were watching from the outside?
1 year is too short of a time to actually get a deep understanding of Japan. I mean, there are people living there for 10 years and still they are not considered insiders. So, as I said, I really enjoyed my outsider role. I think that once you start probing and once you start asking questions and starting to try to blend in, or which is virtually impossible in Japan, obviously. You look like an European, you cannot blend in ever. They get more suspicious of you. So, short answer, no.
But are they interested in you? I mean, are they open towards your traditions, your culture, or are they? They
Yeah,
are.
for sure, for sure, for sure. I think Japanese people are very curious people. They have a lot of fascinations with things. For example, when I went there, I was completely amazed at how fascinated they were about people's other cultures' food. They had entire magazine just dedicated to travel places, classified and explained and put in food. So you could travel to a place just for the food. You know, it was a very novel concept to me because in Romania we didn't have that. If you go to some places, you somehow take into consideration the whole experience. You just don't go there for food.
You know, Mirona,
I
talking
didn't.
about leaps in life, what has that year done for you?
A lot. I mean, it has been a life-changing experience as I intended it, because this is why I went there. No.
Okay, let's talk about change number 1, 2, and 3.
Wow, you want top 10?
Top 3. Top 3.
Number one, I think I'm more open to possibilities and ideas. I considered myself pretty forward-thinking person before going there, and after I got there and was living there for a few months, I started seeing that I was not so open-minded as I thought. So definitely I got more understanding towards differences in cultures and religion and all of that. And I still keep that attitude. After coming back from Japan, I try to keep that attitude. Um, Number two, I was a mess in terms of organizing, being very on time or such things, and Japan kind of puts you in your place when it comes to that type of thing. You have to be organized. You have to be on time. There are no excuses of being late. Like
Very
for,
different than here.
it's very different. Yeah, for Romania, it's kind of fashionable to be a little bit late. It was not accepted there, so not cool to be late. um, and the way things are organized and the way people kind of think about their daily activities, even their whole life, um, put me a little bit in a more organized attitude also. And this is very helpful because I'm a lawyer, so I need to be organized. Messy is not good for me.
Okay, and what was the first thing you did when you came back?
I started looking for a job. It was an economic depression at that time. When I came back, everybody was
What year was that? 2010?
2009.
Nine.
Mm-hmm. Everybody was very worried about the economic state of affairs. I tried to get a job as soon as I came back, but I had a reverse culture shock. So I had to readjust to my own country for a few months, and the people who knew me were thinking, this is so pretentious. You're coming back after 1 year abroad, and now you are readjusting. Um, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I went to get I went to the doctor to get a doctor's appointment to have everything checked, and the ladies there were still snappy. They were still kind of aggressive, passive aggressive, and I was not used to that anymore. And um, I was like a scared kitten, and I was thinking to myself at the same moment, why am I like a scared kitten? I've lived here all of my life. I'm used to the attitude. I'm used to the harshness. I'm used to the frowns and everything. Why am I acting like a scared kitten? But I did. So the food also tasted differently to me. Everything was very salty. Everything was very sweet. Everybody thought I was moody, and my grandma said, "Hi, I've cooked like this for all of my life. You come back and you don't like my food."
That's right.
Japan food is more mild, more bland. A little more. Let's call it a little bit more sophisticated.
That's why they need some other culture's foods. I mean, no salt, no sugar.
Yeah, yeah. No, they have it, but lesser quantities, or I don't know. You get a balance somehow.
Tara, when I was in New York, I think in my very first year, I was in the city, in Manhattan, in Grand Central, and there was a poetry reading right there.
Yeah.
It was impromptu. People were gathering around a guy who was, he was reciting poetry, and he had some guitar, somebody was playing the guitar next to him. And I didn't know who he was. I later found out he was a famous American writer, but it seemed to me
do you remember?
I don't remember the name. I have to check my Facebook posts. So this must have been, I don't think I even had Facebook back then. So maybe it was 2006, 2007. But this guy was he was like a magnet. And I wonder if people were gathering around because the culture of New York is such that you embrace expressions of art, and people, they immediately go around poets and dancers and singers and whatever it is. New York is full of these impromptu scenes of expressions of culture, and we don't see them here. If we would see them here to the extent we see them in New York, I don't know, we're not used to that really, but in New York they're everywhere. And I was thinking to describe for people who are watching what a poetry reading can look like, because you were saying you're going to go to one pretty soon in Vienna, and you were talking about it a little bit, and I found it fascinating. How can you attract people's interest and their availability to just sit and listen to something that's, it's not immediately useful mentally or financially? So it's literature, it's art. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. This is something that I've ended up doing for a living because I came to Romania. Talk about changes is now one of the things I do is give public speeches. Well, they're interactive discussions because I don't like to just talk at people about how poetry isn't intimidating and how it's just a form of storytelling, and that actually, I think just about everybody likes poetry. I mean, kids love it. It's just something happens in school.
Yeah.
It's always in
It's
school.
always in school.
And either you're being taught only poetry, 100 years old or more, and the language is different or you can't access it, or you're taught something in a particular way, told that it has to be understood this way. 99% of the time it's probably not even true. And if it is, it's taught in a way that it's kind of like, I don't know, poetry is this art object in a glass case in a museum with a little description attached.
Exactly.
But it's not like that. It's very much living and outside of that box. So people are drawn to poetry. Sometimes they just don't know it. Maybe they haven't found, like, I don't like most poems I read, and I'm a poet, and I love poetry. You have to find the poems that you feel, and often that doesn't happen in school. So when I first came here, I had some big changes too. You were talking about how in Japan everything's on time. I'm always on time or a little early. Here, I remember when I started teaching, like the students would roll in like 15 minutes late sometimes at first. And there was an international festival at this school that I was teaching at, and they included a whole paragraph for the Americans who were coming that talked about, hey, listen, when you show up, you're not going to know what's going to happen until the very minute, and you just have to try to relax, and this is how it is. It was a very funny paragraph, and I found it to be true. And so I'm adapting to not showing up as early and being the first person in the room. And as far as poetry goes, this is getting towards the poetry readings. I left academia because here, sometimes you have to change your job to suit a place. So I started getting asked to give these talks about poetry. I started teaching poetry workshops outside of the academic institutions, and I loved it. And I started getting students who didn't consider themselves writers, or who sometimes are, but felt like they needed permission to say that they were. But I would get corporate people, I do, lawyers, finance people, who just wanted to access poetry and try to write it, or just try to express themselves. So this is what I'm doing now, and when I give poetry readings, I'm talking to people, I'm telling stories, I'm making them laugh, because when you're giving a reading, you're not just, a lot of writers just, they're like this, especially if they're on their phones. People who read on their phones, they don't look at the audience the whole time. For half an hour, they could be doing this. And I've been through readings like that, as I said earlier, and I don't want to be giving readings like that. So the one in Vienna is on February 15th, and it's part of a series called Whiskey and Poetry Salon, and they do a whiskey tasting, and then we give a reading, and then I think what happened last time was everybody brings in a poem they like, by somebody else usually, and we all talk and we discuss poetry.
It's fun.
So basically, what I do now here is teach creative writing, but I'm basically helping people unlearn what they've learned about poetry and writing, and giving them the space to realize that they are creative and can write, and showing them that to be simple and specific and to use things from your life helps make good writing. So now I'm a writing coach.
I think,
Dana, sorry. Listening to Tara, I was just thinking that maybe we are taking the fun out of poetry in our high school or school environments. We kind of formalize it. I think we kind of make it such a grown-up thing to do, such a serious thing, such a thing only for those who are initiated somehow.
It's so funny to me because the secret is, and I like to read interviews with poets because I like to find out who's honest, and most poets are honest, because everyone loves to ask, how do you write your poetry, or what's your poetry about? These are really hard questions to answer, and actually one is impossible, because every time I write a poem, I have no idea. I'm being guided by, I'm thinking about the words I'm choosing in the sentence by sentence, but I actually have no idea every single time. And this is the magic of it. You don't actually know where you're going to arrive. So I think in school, one thing here is, and I don't remember learning poetry other than a Shakespeare sonnet in high school. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what this is saying. And here in Romania, I always ask my students, I bet there was one poet that you had to learn in school. And I just say 1, 2, 3, and they always shout, Eminescu. Well, I mean, it's great that Eminescu is taught, but I think it's really essential to teach living writers who write the way we speak so that we can relate to them.
And maybe inject a little bit more spunk into the teaching style.
Yeah.
Because you know what I found?
What?
Sorry.
No,
I
go
found
ahead.
that in Japan and Romania have similar teaching styles. We value, learning things by heart sometimes. We value quantity, read a lot, know a lot, be like an encyclopedia type of learning. And we take a little bit out, we take out the spontaneity, the fun, the playful element. And I also saw this aspect when I was in Japan in my classes. So I was the only European person. There were 2 or 3 students from Asia, maybe China, maybe Taiwan, Japanese body of students, and 1 American guy. And when we had our presentations, when we had to present something in front of the class, my presentation was similar to the Japanese students, like in formality and in the way it was presented. American guy presentation. Funny, he was giving us candy, he was joking, and this was an international treaty negotiation class. So it was a serious topic, big formal dinosaur of a topic, and he made it funny. And everybody at the end of his presentation, everybody was, it was so good, And at the end of our presentation, we were bored to death, obviously.
Well, the educational systems are definitely very different because I have taught in private schools here. I have taught at a university. And the first thing I noticed, I ask a lot of questions when I teach. The first class I had on my Fulbright, when I started asking questions, the students were like, wait, you want me to talk? So this was a big difference I noticed, that they were used to writing things down.
That's
Oh,
right.
so it's still the same.
It's still the same.
But it is changing.
Tara, I see you have a wristwatch. What's the time?
It is 10:40.
Okay, so we still have time. Okay, I didn't know how much longer we had. Because I want to talk about something that, I'm trying to promote women as much as I can. And this is a trend I started embracing while in New York. And I had a friend in New York. Her name is Analisa Balares. She is from the Philippines, and she has been in New York for many years. She created this movement, this organization called Women's Sphere. And I became acquainted with the organization maybe about 5 years ago, and I started to see and understand the power of women who are creators, entrepreneurs, professionals, mothers, whatever they are, of being together and talking to each other and supporting each other. And I find that one of the things that's missing from the Romanian society is the loyalty and support that women can and should give each other.
Yes.
Yes.
I've noticed this too, especially in the poetry world.
It's everywhere. It's not just there. So why don't you, if you've noticed things being different in Japan, tell me how they were in terms of how women support each other, professionally, personally, and then maybe we can talk about how you have been supported by women or have not, in the past.
I think in Japan there is a sisterhood, but kind of in the traditional way that they see themselves, most of the women see themselves as people who will go the traditional way, marry, have children, stay at home with them until the children are all grown up, 18 years, 20 years old, something like that. And then if they go close to their retirement, travel a lot or go places together. And I have, oddly enough, when I joined the gym in Japan, all of the people working out were elder people. I was the only young people there, the only young person there. In this sense, they do have a sisterhood. Not so much, I think, in the professional environment, because it's very difficult for women to hold on to a job in the professional environment or actually go up. myself, I have never seen a woman CEO or this type of higher ranking person. I do believe they have some women in higher ranking positions, but I have not seen them.
Okay.
But here in Romania, I do think things are starting to change. Um, during my during these years, I have started advancing in my career in Romania. I have been supported by my fellow Romanian women. I had mostly women managers, and they were all super great. Not your average type of boss who is putting you down in order for them to get up. These were really supportive women who, I don't know, elevated me, let's say.
And I have to say that I sensed and I saw a change compared to 2006, which is when I immigrated to the US. To 2018, I see so many successful women entrepreneurs or women in higher ranking positions. Maybe they're not CEOs, but they're definitely some kind of executive in companies. And they do try to stay close to one another. There are women clubs, business clubs, networking events, so many more than before. And there's a power that comes from it. And it doesn't have to be the differentiating power that says we're against men. We're we're absolutely not. We're pro men, right? But I saw the power of this in New York because it's working together. If we're entrepreneurs, we give business to one another, we encourage each other. And yes, maybe it takes a level of maturity and maybe even a certain age. You know, if you're 20, maybe you don't see the value of being a part of a women-only community.
I don't know. I mean, in Boston, I have an army of a sisterhood, and I always have in the creative community, at school, my personal life, professional life. I've always had that, and it's very strong. Here, I'm starting to find that. But I wanted to say something because you had mentioned things are starting to change. I might not say these names correctly because of my American accent, but there's a poet, a very, very good poet, Elena Vladaranu. It's hard for me to do some of these
Elena
sounds.
Vladaranu.
And she did something really awesome this year with some other women poets. She realized that there was actually no prize specifically for women writers. And she started one. And it was just a few weeks ago. They had the first awards ceremony. That is awesome and necessary. And she's going to continue to do things in addition to this awards ceremony throughout the year. And I believe, if I say it correctly, it's called Sofia Nadezhde, something like that. And this is something new that just happened.
Okay.
And it's building a sisterhood. And it's giving women recognition that they deserve.
I think that the local or the industry-specific initiatives are laudable, and it's great that they're starting to happen. They need to be more in the visibility field of everyone, not just women. And I try to stay, and I will stay completely apolitical. I do not care of including any political conversation in Coffee and Stories. But I do observe and see that there are levels in the Romanian society where women feel they have to compete with men, and they feel even at the top level in business and in politics, it's not women with women or supporting women or engaging with other women. It's against men. So it's a fight between the two realms where women need to still prove that they're like men, or that they're stronger than men, or that they're better than men, which I feel brings down the very quality in them that gives them the advantage, which is their femininity. And let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, because you are a poet, but you're also an entrepreneur.
True.
You run your own business, and you also have ideas and plans about contributing something to the Romanian society.
I will just call a
One entrepreneur? That's funny. That's
for
funny.
now.
For now. So talk a little bit about how you would want to, it's all about creating something, bringing something of value. What is it that you want to do?
Entrepreneurship has always been dear to me, even since college. I really wanted to create something and work for myself. That was my dream. along these years, I started many businesses. Some of them failed spectacularly. So, after they failed, after being down for some time, I started realizing that that failure is actually a plus for me. So I could learn and learn it early. They failed badly.
Give me an example of a business that failed.
I had this really cool idea a few years back to bring to Romania South Korean beauty products, which are all the rage right now in the States and even in the, I don't know, UK. Already people are really buying them. And nobody was aware of them in Romania. So I wanted to bring them to Romania. I started the business along with some of my friends. We brought a first batch of products. They were very well liked. They sold out, and still we couldn't go on with the business for various reasons. We didn't have the money to pay for them to get tested in the European Union. It was a brand nobody had brought into the European Union actually, so we were the first in Romania. And I don't know, we gave up.
What did you learn?
So many things. First of all, we were not concentrating and focusing on one business. We had so many ideas and so much energy was generated from those ideas. It was like we were drinking, I don't know, gallons of coffee every day and wanted to do everything, you know. But this does not work out. If you have ideas, just pick one and then go with that one. And if you see that if it doesn't work, you either pivot, you steer it in another direction, or you put an end to it and you go to some other idea. But trying to do 2 or 3 or 4 ideas at the same time, recipe for disaster.
What's your next idea?
My next idea is one which is proving itself to be very difficult to be implemented, obviously. I don't go for easy ideas. I wanted to create a business locally making and selling really high quality wool sweaters in Romania, because we had a really important tradition of wool garments in Romania, and I'm not seeing it anywhere at this point in time. Every wool processing facility has somehow toned down or is doing only small batches and exporting them. Nothing from Romania. So this was my last idea my current idea is to do something on this part, you know.
Is it organic wool?
I would like it to be. I would even like it even more if it's Romanian wool, but it's like the unicorn. It's very hard to find.
I don't know. Is there anybody out here who knows anything about wool, organic wool, and maybe they can contact you and talk to you? I think it's a great idea. You know, there's a fair in New York. There's a Christmas fair around Bryant Park, and they bring in tons of handmade sweaters that are made out of wool, not cashmere or fancy stuff, just handmade wool sweaters. And I saw that every winter and thought that this would be a great thing for Romania to export, because there's so many women in the countryside.
So many knitters.
You should go on a road trip. Go on a road trip until you get stopped by a bunch of sheep, because ultimately it will happen, and then you can see if you can do a business deal.
Right. What about you? What about your business ideas?
Well, my business idea I've realized my business idea. That feels really good to say. So I'm now, I said I'm outside of the academic arena, but I'm teaching group and individual creative and creative writing workshops and doing creative and narrative consulting. So I have my own company now. And I'm doing creative and narrative consulting for a game writing company here in Bucharest. I'm teaching private clients, say they want to work, some of them want to work on poems, some of them want to get stronger at writing creatively in English, some of them want to work on sci-fi. So just, and
they're not politicians, right? The ones that want to work on sci-fi?
You're funny. No, I don't have any politicians.
You banned them from your classes.
So,
you don't want them to get creative.
Well, I think if politicians got creative, well, maybe if they got creative in a different way. things would. Anyway, I'm going to steer us back. So when I was in Boston, I taught a couple workshops. I taught one at Fidelity Investment. I taught one to a creative consulting firm. And my dad kept saying, you know, you should do more of these. And so again, coming here and adapting has led me back to that point, and didn't even do it on purpose. So now I'm teaching creative workshops. I have a Facebook page. It's called Creative Workshops. It's very simple, but it's attached to me in my name because the company is basically me. And
woman show.
Do you feel more of an entrepreneur in Romania than you felt in the US?
Well, yeah, because I am one.
Absolutely.
And in the US, I wasn't one. In
Yeah.
the US, I worked at the Center for Ethics at Harvard, and I taught at Boston University, and I taught at a women's prison outside of Boston. And, you know, then I worked in food service. But
Wait. So you taught at the women's prison, which
Yeah.
I knew about you, but I want, what is that like? You know, what kind of a freedom or what kind of an emotional experience does it give to women who have been deprived of their freedom?
Well, the first thing they said to me when I walked into the classroom, one of the students said, "Are you a teacher in the real world?" And I thought, oh, they think that they're just going to get fake teachers. And I said, this is the real world, and yes. And it's my favorite teaching I've ever done in my life. I would still be doing it if I were in the US right now. And these students actually are getting degrees from Boston University. Sometimes they can do something with them, sometimes they can't, because we have a big problem with mass incarceration, and it's nearly impossible to reintegrate back into society. And I know this because I have a family member who has been in and out of the prison system, which is why I wanted to teach in prison, because my sister told me how important writing was, and especially poetry, in terms of getting you through a day. Mm-hmm. So I taught composition, and I snuck literature and poetry and everything I could into it. And I taught Hamlet, and I had them acting Hamlet out. And one of my teachers, her name's Jill McDonough, she has taught in prisons for, I don't know, I want to say at least 15 years now. And she told me, teach Shakespeare in prison, because they're going to think they can't do it. And then they're going to realize they can. And, well, teaching Shakespeare is also not the easiest thing. And I had stacks of Hamlet on the table. And when the students were walking in, they were looking at them thinking, oh. And by the end of the semester, they were calling each other Shakespeare characters' names and making jokes. And it was amazing. And I had one student who got thrown into solitary confinement the last couple weeks of the semester, which meant that she wasn't going to be able to write her paper diagnosing Hamlet's madness and providing evidence from the text. And the last day I got to class, I opened up my drawer to get the attendance sheet, and I found several sheets of paper that weren't attached that had pencil, and I picked it up, and it was an essay that the woman had managed to write in solitary confinement, and she turned it in on time. So this is my favorite teaching I've ever done in my life, and I don't accept late work now because...
If you can do it in solitary confinement, then what's your reason?
But, and I just... And in writing, and this is what I love teaching, I love teaching writing because you're also working with psychology, you're working with confidence, you're working with self-empowerment. And
you know, I see there's another prejudice or bias that's specific to Romania, even though Romanians are all poets. So I don't know if you've learned this about Romanians.
This is like a saying I've learned, like every Romanian is a poet.
Every Romanian is a poet, and every Romanian is a politician. So these two
I never heard the politician one.
Yes, so absolutely.
It's a newer version.
It's a newer version. But because every Romanian is a poet, that in a way brought down the value of creating or being exposed to poetry in a constant way. So constantly you have that in your life. In the US, I felt, in the environments where I was, living my life, I felt that the value of poetry or the value of literature is being diminished because in the US it's so important to it's so important to treasure, I don't know, IT or math or the real sciences. And the soft parts of us, the emotions, are not gonna get you through the day if you're in a workaholic environment or something like that. But I feel that in Romania, there's a lot of openness towards creativity on the one side, and in a way, we're putting it down if it's too much in our life. So if it's too much, we have to put it down. But on the other hand, we can't live without it. This is what makes us special. And I'm being told we only have 3 minutes left of the 2 minutes left of the show. And because we end every show with a little sweet moment, this is Tim te iubesc mult. It's a chocolate with love messages.
Aww.
And you can each open the little Tim bar. And inside, you're going to find a little box of chocolate. And inside the box of chocolate, there's a love message this time. Usually we have messages especially made for coffee and stories, but we had a poet again today with us. We had a poetry scholar last time, so I kept the love messages inside. So we're each going to read our message. We're going to start with you, Mirona.
Wow. It's very fitting. It's like a Chinese cookie. To love is to search for the half of the whole you have once been a part of.
Very nice.
Yeah. I might say that I already found it.
That's a good feeling. Mine's fitting too. To love means to go in front of yourself. Oscar Wilde.
That's wonderful.
And inside of yourself.
If I had a flower for every time I thought of you, I could walk forever through my garden. Alfred Tennyson. Okay, so do I still have 10 seconds, 15 seconds? I still have a minute? Oh, okay, I'm gonna let the two of you end the show with some thought that you would like to share with a woman watching today who's not feeling particularly optimistic about her professional life or her life in Romania. So let's see.
Okay, so if there's something that feels impractical, but it never goes away and it's nagging, and it's natural and you're good at it, and it doesn't make sense, do it, believe me.
That's very good.
And think about the long game because sometimes it takes time.
I want to say that you know those motivational quotes everybody hears about that. Believe in yourself, trust yourself, make the most out of it, be positive, be optimistic. I know you hear them, and I know they're cliches, but whenever you're feeling down and you feel that you don't deserve something, just know that you do. Trust whatever is inside of you, and trust your path into this world.
And give yourself permission.
It's all about creating a space that you fill up with people who encourage you and who are like-minded to you and with whom you can literally express what's best within yourself. And we try to do that at Coffee and Stories. Thank you for being with us for yet another edition, live from here, Talent Garden, Bucharest, in the same wonderful space with Beans and Dots. I invite you to come over and feel the energy. Thank you, and until next Saturday, have an inspired week. And thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Dana.